To Kill a Mockingbird, Chapter 7, Part 2. Outside, it was still black dark. The remaining cars were parked on the other side of the building, and their headlights were little help. Here, Scout, said Jim, let me hold on to your hawk. You might lose your balance. I can see all right. I felt a slight pressure on my head and assumed that Jim had grabbed that end of the ham. You got me? Uh-huh. We began crossing the black schoolyard, straining to see our feet. Jim, I said, I forgot my shoes. Well, let's go get them. But as we turned around, all the auditorium lights went off. You can get them tomorrow, he said. I felt his fingers press hard on the top of my costume. Jim, you don't have to. Hush a minute, Scout, he said, pinching me. We walked along silently. Minute's up, I said. I turned to look at him, but his outline was barely visible. Thought I heard something, he said. Stop a minute. We stopped. Hear anything? No. We had not gone 5 paces before he made me stop again. Jim, are you trying to scare me? You know I'm too old. Be quiet, he said, and I knew he was not joking. The night was still. Occasionally there was a sudden breeze that hit my bare legs, but that was all. We listened. Heard an old dog just then, I said. It's not that, Jim answered. I hear it when we're walking along, but when we stop, I don't hear it. You just hear my costume rustling. I said it more to convince myself than Jim, for sure enough, as we began walking, I heard the sound he was talking about. It was not my costume. It's just old Cecil, said Jim presently. Let's don't let him think we're hurrying. We slowed to a crawl. I asked Jim how Cecil could follow us in this dark. Looked to me like he'd bump into us from behind. I can see you, Scout, Jim said. How? I can't see you. Miss Crenshaw painted your fat streaks with some of that shiny stuff. I expect Cecil can see you well enough. I would show Cecil that we knew he was behind us. Cecil Jacobs is a big wet hen, I yelled suddenly, turning around. We stopped. There was no acknowledgement save hen bouncing off the schoolhouse wall. I'll get him, said Jim. Hey! Hey, 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 answered the schoolhouse wall. It was unlike Cecil to hold out for so long. Jim signaled me to stop again. He said softly, Scout, can you take that thing off? I think so, but I ain't got anything on under it much. I've got your dress here. I can't get it on in the dark. Okay, he said, never mind. We're almost to the tree now. A few yards from that and we'll be to the road. We can see the street light then. Jim was talking in an unhurried, flat, toneless voice. We had not increased our pace. Jim knew as well as I that it was difficult to walk fast, barefooted, without tripping. Whoever was following us dragged his feet as if wearing heavy shoes and thick cotton pants. What I thought were trees rustling was the soft swish of cotton on cotton, wheek, wheek, with every step. Jim pressed my head. We stopped and listened again. The sand was cold under my feet, and I knew we were near the big oak. Shufflefoot had not stopped with us this time. His trousers swished softly, and then suddenly he was running towards us with no child's steps. Run, Scout! Run, run! Jim screamed. I took one giant step and found myself reeling. My arms useless. In the dark, I could not keep my balance. Jim! Jim, help me, Jim! Something crushed the chicken wire around me, and I fell to the ground, floundering to escape my wire prison. From somewhere nearby came scuffling, kicking sounds. Then someone rolled against me, and I felt Jim. He was up like lightning and pulling me with him, but though my head and shoulders were freed, I was still badly entangled in the wire. I felt Jim's hand leave me with a jerk. More scuffling, and there came a dull, crunching sound, and Jim screamed. I turned in the direction of Jim's scream and sank into a flabby stomach. Its owner caught me with arms like steel. I could not move as he slowly squeezed the breath out of me. Suddenly, he was pulled backwards, almost carrying me with him. I thought, Jim's up again. Near me, a man was breathing heavily. He coughed violently, a sobbing, bone-shaking cough. Jim! Jim didn't answer. There was no answer but the man's heavy breathing. The man began moving around as if searching for something. I heard him groan and pull something heavy along the ground. It was coming to me that there were now 4 of us by the tree. Atticus? The man was walking heavily and unsteadily toward the road. I went to where I thought he had been and felt frantically along the ground, reaching out with my toes. Presently, I touched someone. Jim? I touched buttons, a collar, a face. A prickly stubble on the face told me it was not Jim. I made my way along in what I thought was the direction of the road, found it, and looked down to the street light. A man was passing under it, carrying Jim. He was some countryman I did not know. Jim's arm was dangling crazily. By the time I reached the corner, the man was crossing our front yard. Light from our front door framed Atticus for an instant. He ran down the steps, and together he and the man took Jim inside. Aunt Alexandra ran to meet me at the front door. Call Dr. Reynolds. Atticus's voice came sharply from Jim's room. Where's Scout? Here she is, Aunt Alexandra called, pulling me along anxiously with her. I'm all right, Auntie. I said, you better call. She took the receiver from the hook and said, Eula May, get Dr. Reynolds, quick. When she finished the call, Atticus took the receiver from her, rattled the hook, and said, Eula May, give me the sheriff. Please. Heck, Atticus Finch. Someone's been after my children. Jim's hurt. It's between here and the schoolhouse. Run out there for me, please, and see if he's still around. Thanks, Heck. Atticus? Is Jim dead? No, Scout. Look after her, sister, he called as he went down the hall. And Alexandra's fingers trembled as she unwound the crushed fabric and wire from around me. Are you all right, Charlie? She asked over and over. It was a relief to be out. My arms were red with small hexagonal marks. I rubbed them and they felt better. Auntie, is Jim dead? No, darling, he's unconscious. We won't know how badly he's hurt until Dr. Reynolds gets here. Jean Louise, what happened? I don't know. She left it at that and brought me my overalls to put on. A car stopped in front of the house and Dr. Reynolds came in the door and said, Good Lord. He walked toward me and said, You're still standing, and changed his course. He knew that if I was in bad shape, so was Jim. After 10 forevers, he returned. Is Jim dead? I asked. Far from it, he said, squatting down to me. He's got a bump on the head, just like yours, and a broken arm. Scout, look that way. Roll your eyes. Now look over yonder. He's got a bad break, like somebody tried to wring his arm off. Now look at me. Then he's not dead? No. Dr. Reynolds got to his feet and put on his hat. We'll have to x-ray his arm tomorrow, but don't worry. He'll be as good as new. Go have a look at him, Scout. Dr. Reynolds' step was young and brisk. Mr. Heck Tate's was not. His heavy boots punished the porch. But he said the same thing Dr. Reynolds said when he came in. You all right, Scout? He added. Yes, sir. I'm going in to see Jim. I'll go with you, said Mr. Tate. Aunt Alexandra had shaded Jim's reading light with a towel. He was lying on his back. There was an ugly mark along one side of his face, and his left arm lay out from his body. Jim? Atticus spoke. He can't hear you, Scout. He's out like a light. He was coming around, but Dr. Reynolds put him out again. Yes, sir. I retreated. Aunt Alexandra was sitting in a rocking chair by the fireplace. The man who brought Jim in was standing in a corner, leaning against the wall, and Atticus was standing by Jim's bed. Mr. Heck Tate stood in the doorway, a flashlight bulging from his pants pocket. Come in, Heck, said Atticus. Did you find anything? Mr. Tate sniffed. He glanced sharply at the man in the corner, nodded to him, then looked around the room. Let's all sit down, Atticus said. Mr. Tate sat in Jim's desk chair and waited until Atticus got a chair from the living room and settled himself. I wondered why he had not brought a chair for the man in the corner, but Atticus knew the ways of country people better than I did. The man was probably more comfortable where he was. Mr. Finch, said Mr. Tate, I tell you what I found. I found a little girl's dress. Your dress, Scout? Yes, sir, if it's a pink one with smocking, I said. I found some funny looking pieces of muddy colored cloth. That's from my costume, Mr. Tate. Mr. Tate ran his hands down his thighs. He rubbed his left arm and investigated Jim's mantelpiece. What is it, Heck? Said Atticus. Mr. Tate found his neck and rubbed it. Bob Ewell's lying on the ground under that tree down yonder with a kitchen knife stuck up under his ribs. He's dead, Mr. Finch. Somehow I could think of nothing but Mr. Bob Ewell saying he'd get Atticus if it took him the rest of his life. Mr. Ewell almost got him, and it was the last thing he did. Are you sure? Atticus said bleakly. He's dead, all right, said Mr. Tate. He's good and dead. He won't hurt these children again. I didn't mean that. Atticus seemed to be talking in his sleep. His age was beginning to show. Hadn't we better go to the living room? Aunt Alexandra said. If you don't mind, said Mr. Tate, I'd rather us stay in here if it won't hurt Jim any. I want to have a look at his injuries while Scout tells us about it. Miss Scout, see if you can tell us what happened while it's still fresh in your mind. I went to Atticus and felt his arms go around me. I buried my head against him. We started home. I said, Jim, I forgot my shoes. As soon as we started back for him, the lights went out. I described how we walked on again and how Jim heard footsteps. I was shut up in my costume, but pretty soon I could hear them myself. They walked when we walked and stopped when we stopped. Jim said he could see me because of the shiny paint on my costume. I was a ham. How's that? Asked Mr. Tate, startled. Atticus described my role to Mr. Tate. When she came in, he said, her costume was crushed to a pulp. Mr. Tate rubbed his chin. I wondered why he had all those marks on him. Let me see that thing, if you will, sir. Atticus fetched the remains of my costume. Mr. Tate turned it over. This thing probably saved her life, he said. Look. He pointed. A shiny, clean line, the mark of a knife slash, stood out on the dull wire. Bob Ewell meant business. He was out of his mind, said Atticus. Don't like to contradict you, Mr. Finch. Wasn't crazy, but mean as hell. Low-down skunk with enough liquor in him to make him brave enough to kill children. Mr. Tate sighed. Well, Scout, you heard him behind you. Yes, sir. When we got under the tree, all of a sudden something grabbed me and mashed my costume, and I fell down. Heard a tussling under the tree, sort of. Jim found me, but someone, Mr. Ewell, yanked him down. They tussled some more, and then there was this funny noise. I stopped. That was Jim's arm. Anyway, Jim hollered, and the next thing, Mr. Ewell was trying to squeeze me to death, I reckon. Then somebody yanked Mr. Ewell down. Jim must have got up, I guess. That's all I know. And then, Mr. Tate was looking at me sharply. Somebody was panting and coughing. I thought Atticus had come to help us and was wore out, but, well, who was it really? Well, there he is, Mr. Tate. He can tell you his name. As I said it, I half pointed to the man in the corner. He was still leaning against the wall with his arms folded across his chest. As I pointed, he brought his hands down and pressed his palms against the wall. They were white hands, hands that had never seen the sun. So white they stood out garishly against the dull cream wall. I looked from his hands to his sand-stained khaki pants. My eyes traveled up his thin frame to his torn denim shirt. His face was as white as his hands, but for a shadow on his jutting chin. His cheeks were thin to hollowness. His mouth was wide. There were shallow, almost delicate indentations at his temples, and his gray eyes were so colorless, I thought he was blind. When I pointed to him, a strange small spasm shook him, as if he heard fingernails scrape slate. But as I gazed at him in wonder, the tension slowly drained from his face. His lips parted into a timid smile. And our neighbor's image blurred with my sudden tears. Hey, Boo, I said.